Hi, welcome to Spoiler Lab. A man finds himself in an automated prison. To get out, he must outsmart a computer. Today we will recap the story of the 2016 movie Infinity Chamber. A man wakes up lying on a bed in an unfamiliar room. He's trying to figure out what's going on and starts exploring the room. Suddenly a suspended camera appears in front of him, from which a man's voice is heard. The voice wishes the man a good morning and inquires about his well-being. The main character is perplexed as to what has happened to him. He remembers almost nothing and feels wrecked. His last memory is of a severe blow to the back. The voice sounds friendly and inquires about the man's name. The main character introduces himself as Frank, and the voice presents himself as that of his life maintenance operator Howard. Frank is at a loss as to what this place is and how he got here, but Howard is not going to explain anything. All he says is that this room is in an underground level. Frank starts to remember. He's been arrested, but he didn't do anything wrong. He has no record. He's a civilian. Howard is sympathetic and reports that Frank's case is pending. Frank asks Howard to double-check the information, because he hasn't violated anything and hopes he gets a call and a lawyer, but he gets a negative answer. Frank is perplexed. He can't understand what Howard's job is if he doesn't give answers to questions. Howard replies, his main task is to keep Frank alive. In Frank's mind, fragments of memories from the past flicker. He wakes up in the morning in his house and goes to the kitchen. His dog sleeps on the floor. Meanwhile, the invisible Howard offers Frank 4 different flavors of water, food, and music. Frank refuses and wonders why, instead of all this variety, he can't just explain to him what's going on. Then Howard suggests that the prisoner go for a walk and stretch his legs. Frank thinks this is his chance to break free, and willingly agrees. But instead of going out, all that appears in front of the man is a treadmill. Disappointed, Frank asks how long he will be kept here. Howard doesn't know. Frank asks to be put through to his supervisor. Howard has no such option. He can only work by protocol. Frank gives his last name, Lerner, and asks to see why he is here, because he can't just be kept in a cell. But Howard again gives the standard answer, no access. This pisses the prisoner off. Frank remembers his old life again. He takes a shower at home, gets dressed and feeds the dog. There is news on TV about a missing civil rights activist, Fletcher May, and the clashes between the militants and the police. In his solitary confinement, Frank worries about his fate. It turns out that no one has any idea what happened to him. He just disappeared. Exhausted, Frank sinks into a chair. To distract the prisoner from his thoughts, Howard asks where he is from. Frank replies, from the South. Howard, for his part, says he is from Austin and grew up in a small town near Seattle. Then he got a job with this company. Frank argues that Howard's work should include respect for prisoners' civil rights and laws. After all, Howard can get around his protocol. Not receiving an intelligible answer, Frank asks for food. After getting food, the prisoner asks to see if anyone has been in his apartment. He has a dog. He won't make it if no one comes. But the standard answer is that Howard can't help. Frank loses his temper, raises his voice and swings his fist at the camera. Then Howard simply turns off the lights and removes the eye camera. Frank again recalls fragments from his past life. Morning routines at home, his father's hospital room, the subway ride, the city at night, and the lights of a passing helicopter. Time passes and the lights come back on in Frank's cell. The man asks for water, and Howard willingly complies. After that, he notices a puddle on the floor. Frank excuses himself. He wasn't even given a bucket. Then Howard opens the bathroom door and tells him to ask for such things from now on. Frank goes into the bathroom, and the door closes immediately behind him. While the man is inside, the cell is being cleaned. He is puzzled. Did he enter the cell somehow? Howard has no answers. Frank sinks back into his memories. This time he sees himself in an evening cafe. He is looking at the visitors and orders coffee from the barista girl. Meanwhile, in the cell, he gets food from Howard. It tastes disgusting, but it has all the vitamins and minerals needed to sustain life. Frank wonders if Howard himself has tried it. The traditional answer is that Howard has no such information. Frank becomes bored with his conversation partner's standard answers, and he begins to suspect something is wrong. The man repeats his companion's name many times, to which he receives the invariable answer, yes, Frank. This is how the prisoner realizes that all this time he was communicating with a computer, not a live person. The man goes berserk in his cell. He doesn't intend to talk to the machine anymore and demands that Howard calls one of the real people holding him, but the machine assures him that it can answer all his questions. Frank calms down a bit and tries to figure out how this can be. After all, Howard named his birthplace. It confirms that it was assembled in Austin and programmed in Seattle. He names his brand, and Frank is impressed by the expensive equipment that serves him his food and cleans up his defecation. The man admits that he despises all computers, because many things cannot be computerized. Frank is transported back to the cafe in his thoughts. The barista girl tries to guess his name, but she fails. Frank turns his attention to the reader near the cash register and looks at the pictures on the wall. The girl admits that she took these photos herself. Frank admires her work. After that, a warm conversation ensues between the young people. The girl gently squeezes Frank's hand and guesses his real name. It turns out that the girl's name is Gabby. She smiles at the man and walks away. At this point, armed men appear behind Frank's back. A flash, and he finds himself in his cell. Frank approaches the vent, looks at the hypnotic pattern, and allows a flood of memories to sweep through his thoughts. Frank sees his apartment, the subway, the city at night, the cafe, the girl, and the pictures of nature. Gabby is chatting nicely with him again and takes his hand. Only now it's as if Frank is remembering more details, but the bottom line is the same. A blow to the back in the cell. Frank comes to his senses and shares his thoughts with Howard. It was like he was having a waking dream. The dream is the same, but more and more details appear in it. Frank believes that he is having these hallucinations because of the pattern on the vent. Howard can't explain what Frank's memories mean. He was programmed only to keep the man alive and keep him within the confines of this room until his case was heard. But Frank isn't waiting for the case to be heard. Howard has nothing to add, so he offers the prisoner something to eat. Frank agrees and jokes sarcastically about the taste of the food there. Howard laments that people have not programmed him to recognize sarcasm. Frank says it's not the most necessary function in keeping a person alive. He comforts Howard and catches himself thinking that he is communicating with the computer as if it is a living person. Frank asks if Howard remembers what he used to do. Maybe Frank isn't the first person Howard has interacted with, it's just that his memory gets purged on a regular basis, but Howard has no recollection of any such thing. He asks for more details on why some things are not meant to be computerized. Then Frank talks about his father. When he became ill, doctors hooked him up to a special machine and kept him alive for 4 years. But it was not fate's gift for him, for Frank's father accepted his fate already. He had long since found peace and was ready to leave this world, but the machine took that opportunity away from him and gave him in return a life that could not even be called life, and everyone around them pretended that they saw a miracle performed by a machine. Therefore, according to Frank, sometimes life must flow naturally, without the interference of modern technology. Howard listens attentively to his companion and says he wants to help him. Howard reports that he reviewed Frank's file and found an error, a discrepancy between his verification and delivery codes. It turns out that Frank was brought to the same place he was taken from, which is technically impossible. So, he can send a request for a repair and an administrator to arrive. But the request will not be accepted without the need for repair, which means Howard must be put out of commission. Frank is willing to help with that, except that Howard is stumped, because the program can't allow the prisoner to hurt him. Howard knows that Frank is going to put him out of commission, which means he has to defend himself. According to protocol, it turns out that this option is not suitable. Then Frank turns away and decides to think of another way. As if nothing had happened, he asks Howard to pour some coffee. While the computer is distracted, Frank strikes him. Then the siren goes off and gas starts flowing into the chamber. Howard no longer responds. Frank tries not to inhale the gas, but he fails, and he loses consciousness. The man vaguely sees a strange chamber where he is given an injection. Then he finds himself again in the cafe with the pictures on the wall and the girl behind the counter. Everything happens as it always does. But looking at a frustrated and silent Frank, Gabby makes him coffee on the house. All the customers are already leaving, but for some reason the people who shot Frank from behind don't show up. He continues to sit quietly in the coffee shop and tries to find inconsistencies in the events. Then Frank understands. Gabby didn't ask him to pay for the coffee, and the card reader didn't activate. The girl continues to chat amicably with Frank about everything. He lets Gabby's words slip past his ears and tries to explain to her that everything that is happening is unreal. The girl doesn't understand anything and asks him to help her lift the chairs. Frank agrees, but the scanner keeps him busy. He looks closely at the device and realizes the scanner gives out the identification number of another person. At that moment, the armed men reappear behind him. Frank wakes up in his cell. Now he understands what the mistake is. The law enforcers who came to the coffee shop mistook him for someone else. Howard objects. The bioscanner cannot make a mistake. But Frank insists. He got into the system under someone else's number. There was a glitch. Howard reminds him, however, that Frank saw this whole scene with the wrong number only in his memories. And that may well mean that Frank only saw what he wanted to see, not the truth. However, Frank objects that he cannot control his subconscious, and that scene in the cafe may be true. Howard offers to contact the administrator again, but the last attempt was too traumatic for Frank. So he refuses and begins to dictate to Howard the ID number from his vision, but can't remember it to the end. Frank needs to sink back into his visions. He looks at the fan and finds himself back in bed in his apartment. The day repeats with more details, and this time Frank sees his father more clearly next to the machines. Afterwards, he walks through the city at night again and sees an explosion. Frank is immediately transported to his cell. Only it's dark, with only strange flashes blinking, and Howard doesn't respond to inquiries. Explosions can be heard here, too. Frank starts screaming and asking for help, but gets no response. Then he goes to bed. When he wakes up, he realizes that nothing has changed. Frank tries to fill a glass with water dripping from the ceiling to get some water to drink. Suddenly, Frank hears a sound from behind the ventilation grill. The guy looks through it and sees a man. Frank wonders, is he a prisoner, too? Does he know what happened? The man knocks down the grill in Frank's cell and informs him that the company that imprisoned them here has been defeated. The wardens left the building and destroyed the entire electronic network. He also says he has always called for the destruction of the power source. He'd give anything to see the damn machines break down. The man assures that all prisoners will soon be found. They just have to wait. And then he says his name, Fletcher May. He is one of the Alliance soldiers rebelling against the machines. Frank, too, starts remembering of this alliance. Frank notices that Fletcher is armed with an iron pipe, and he explains that he took the pipe from the shower. The door opened by itself when the lights went out. Frank doesn't think it was just a power outage. If the Alliance is serious about destroying the company, then the whole system could be completely destroyed. At this time, Fletcher shouts enthusiastically that he has breached the wall, but it's just more concrete behind it. The man cries in frustration and shares his speculation about how the pattern on the vent works on the inmates. It hypnotizes people and connects to the neurotransmitters that form memory. It was the company's way of trying to get secret information out of the inmate's subconscious. But there is a way to fool the system if you lead it down the wrong path in your memories. The next day, Fletcher calls Frank again and says he won't survive the night. Frank reassures his companion they must hold on and wait. But Fletcher objects that there is nothing more to wait for. He no longer knows what is real and what is not. Fletcher wants to choose his own path and says goodbye. Gas starts coming out of his chamber. Frank calls out to his companion, but he does not respond. Later, Frank wakes up in his cell. He thinks of Fletcher, but the grill between their cells is in its usual place. Howard comes alive and asks Frank to introduce himself. The robot was erased and rebooted. Frank does not engage in conversation with him and sits back in his chair in despair. The guy goes back into his memories. He sees the cafe and Gabby. She calls him by his first name. Frank is surprised how she knows him, and asks if he can just sit in the cafe. Gabby says okay and takes another visitor's order. Suddenly the scanner activates. Frank is hiding. He doesn't want to be shot. He confesses to Gabby. He's being held in a government facility and they are using a neuroscanner to find evidence of a crime Frank didn't commit. Frank tells the girl his story. Everything that happens in the cafe is not real. Soon Frank will be back in his cell again. Gabby tries to play along with him and wonders when he's going back to the bunker, but Frank can't control it and thanks her for allowing him to stay. Everything repeats itself over and over again. The morning, the cafe, Gabby, Howard, the camera, the shots in the back. Each time he stays with Gabby, Frank becomes closer to her. The girl accompanies Frank in almost every vision and already believes his story is real. Gradually he realizes Fletcher's words, "You don't have to try to hide the information from the wardens, you just have to hide the way to it." When the enforcers come to the cafe to arrest him another time, Frank and Gabby capture the pursuers. Frank tries to get an answer from one of them, but suddenly realizes that it's all just in his imagination. Frank tries to convey this information to Gabby. She comforts him and promises that they'll figure it all out, no matter how long it takes. Frank goes back to his cell and talks to Howard. He suddenly notices that at certain times the robot powers down for a few seconds. The man goes into his parallel life with Gabby and tells her about his discovery. The fact that Howard shuts down for 12 seconds means that he is nearing the end of the cycle, which is renewed every 3 months. Frank has an escape plan. Gabby asks when High is going to bring it to fruition. Frank replies, "Today." He just won't last another 3 months until the end of the next cycle. Although Gabby only exists in Frank's imagination, it pains him to part with her. He promises to find her in the real world. The girl then takes the money and punches in Frank's order. The scanner activates. The lovers kiss goodbye. The men with guns enter. A shot is fired and Frank is back in his cell. Howard begins the usual conversation. Frank asks for coffee and starts repeating the same phrase, and Howard starts repeating it too. Frank asks to open the bathroom and stands on the threshold, and then Howard freezes. Frank manages to put a bag on the computer in 12 seconds and get the pipe out of the toilet. After that, Howard turns on and promises to help. The robot janitor comes into the cell, but Frank manages to immobilize him with the pipe and comes out into the dark hallway. Frank opens the hatch of the underground bunker and gets out. He finds himself in the desert and runs towards the distant mountains. There are plenty of wind turbines ahead and not a single person. He takes a break in the shade and walks on until he notices a gas station. Frank enters a deserted store, pulls a bottle of water from the refrigerator, and starts drinking eagerly. Suddenly he sees a picture on the wall from Gabby's cafe. The bottle falls out of the guy's hands, and he ends up in his cell. Frank is desperate because his escape turned out to be another hallucination. He says he won't drink or eat anymore. Howard has to let him out, because otherwise he won't survive, which means Howard can't do his job of keeping the prisoner alive. Finally, Frank remembers why he is here and tells Howard all about it. Frank was a member of the Alliance that fought the machines. He was the creator of a virus used to destroy the system, and the flash drive with the virus is kept by him. But Frank managed to close the depths of his brain, and the company staff found nothing. Now Howard is broken, and no one goes to fix it, because there's no one left here. The robot must bypass the protocol to save the life of Frank. He must open the door, but Howard refuses. The computer can only do what it is programmed to do. Frank puts the rope on himself and gets up on the chair. And in another reality, he comes to the cafe and sits down in front of Gabby. Frank tries to hang himself right on Howard's post. In the parallel reality with Gabby, he becomes mute and motionless. The girl tries to bring Frank to his senses. At that moment, the rope in the cell breaks and the door opens. It turns out that Howard did help Frank. The man goes out into the hallway and finds a remote control in one of the rooms. There's no one there. Everything is ruined. He talks to Howard, thanks him, and says goodbye. It's a painful moment for him, because Howard has become a friend to him. Frank gets out on the snowy surface and walks toward the mountains. And when he descends into the ravine, he freezes stunned because he sees before him the landscape with Gabby's picture in front of him. Frank thinks it's another hallucination. He falls to his knees in the snow in desperation and begins to freeze. But at this point he is found by tourists, real people. Frank returns home. The news is on TV, reporting that Frank is the sole survivor of the center, which was abandoned by the military about 2 years ago. He was kept alive by a special system, and energy came from wind farms until the supply was exhausted. More than 300 prisoners did not survive. It was a crime of a regime that has flouted all human rights. Frank returns to his real life. He enters the cafe where Gabby works. Here he sees the photo on the wall and the girl herself. He orders coffee and thanks Gabby, but she wonders why he called her that. Her real name is Madeline. The girl begins to guess Frank's name and takes his hand. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.